I remember my 6th birthday more clearly than I remember most of the birthdays that came after it. Not because something wonderful happened, but because nothing happened at all. I woke up expecting cake, balloons, maybe even a small toy wrapped in paper. Instead, there was silence. My parents were busy with my older sister's piano recital. They rushed around gathering sheet music and curling her hair. I stood by the doorway in my favorite dress, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. When I said, "Today's my birthday," my mom replied, "That's nice, honey," and then asked me to pass her the hairspray. I passed it. Then I went upstairs and cried quietly into my pillow so I wouldn't ruin her big day. At 7, I started taping notes to the bathroom mirror. 3 days left, 2 days. Tomorrow is the day. When the morning came, the mirror was clean. The notes had been removed. My mom had cleaned the mirror and left no trace behind. At breakfast, I waited. Nothing. My brother complained about his cereal. My dad asked about gas prices. My mom sighed and said she had a headache. My birthday slipped past in silence. Again. At 8, I told my teacher at school. She gave me a sticker and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." It was the only happy birthday I heard that day. I saved the sticker, put it in a notebook. It became a habit, collecting small recognitions from people who noticed when my family didn't. At 9, I tried again. I baked muffins the night before, burnt the first batch. The second turned out okay. I put them in a Tupperware box and left a note, "Happy birthday to me." When I got home from school, the box was empty. No note, no acknowledgement. Just crumbs on the counter. At 10, I stopped baking. At 11, I stayed at school late, reading in the library. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to pretend I wasn't hurt. At 12, I cried. But not on the day. I cried the day before. Because I already knew. At 13, I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. I watched my sister have a birthday party with 20 guests and a pink and gold cake shaped like a ballet slipper. I asked my mom once, "Why don't I get parties like that?" She said, "Julia's more social than you." At 14, I stopped asking questions. At 15, I told a friend it was my birthday. She gave me a bracelet. We weren't even that close. She said, "You just seem like someone who deserves something nice today." I wore that bracelet until it broke 2 years later. I still have the pieces. At 16, my mom asked me to help set up for Julia's sweets teen. I worked on it all week. Balloons, ribbons, cupcakes, the works. On my birthday a month later, she said, "You're too old for this stuff now, right?" I nodded. I wasn't. I never was. At 17, I started writing letters to myself. Long ones. About how I felt. About how I wished things were different. About the girl I hoped to become. I burned the first one. I kept the rest. At 18, I moved out. The night before my birthday, I sat on the floor of my dorm room and cried. My roommate came in, confused. I told her it was nothing. She brought me a cookie from the vending machine and said, "Happy birthday anyway." That was the first person in years to say it without being told. At 19, I spent the whole day pretending I was someone else. I went to a bookstore, walked into a coffee shop in another part of the city, made up a fake last name when asked. I liked how it felt, being untraceable, being mine. At 20, I stopped returning my parents' calls in February. They never noticed the pattern. At 21, I told people I didn't like birthdays, that they were overrated. That adulthood had made me practical. That I was fine. I was not fine. At 22, I went hiking alone. I packed my own snacks. I lit a birthday candle on a protein bar. I made a wish. I wished that one day I wouldn't wish for family to remember me. I wished I'd stop hoping. At 23, I got one text. "Hope you're well," no name. No mention of birthday. I pretended it wasn't from my dad. It was. At 24, I deleted every photo with candles and cake that wasn't mine. I deleted the ones where I was in the background of someone else's celebration. I left the ones where I was alone. I like those better. At 25, I bought myself a silver ring. Engraved inside, "You count." I wore it on my thumb like a reminder. When someone asked what it meant, I said, "It's for the girl who used to be forgotten." At 26, I changed my name on social media, removed the last name, replaced it with a symbol. People thought it was artsy. I thought it was honest. At 27, I took a trip to the mountains. No phone, no signal, no family. I wrote a postcard to myself. "You are not invisible." I mailed it. I framed it when it arrived. At 28, I sat in my apartment, lights low, one candle lit. I looked in the mirror and said, "Happy birthday, Claire." It echoed. It felt real. Becoming quiet wasn't a decision I made one morning with resolve and clarity. It was a slow retreat, the kind of disappearance that starts when you speak and no one hears you. At first, I thought maybe I was talking at the wrong time, saying the wrong things. So I tried harder, louder, clearer, but nothing changed. Conversations rolled over me like waves. People responded to parts of my sentences, never the whole. They changed the subject. They forgot my questions. They talked over my answers. And I started to shrink. I began trimming my thoughts down to fit the room. I spoke in headlines. I edited feelings into manageable pieces. I told half-truths because full ones never landed. My silences were interpreted as agreement. My absence as independence. My detachment as strength. I realized no one really knew me. They knew the version of me that was convenient. The girl who didn't make things messy. Who didn't argue? Who didn't take up too much space? So I leaned in. I became who they thought I was. Polite. Distant. Silent. At family dinners, I nodded, smiled, passed the salt, laughed when cued. I stopped telling stories because no one asked questions. I stopped offering opinions because no one listened. I sat at the table like furniture, only useful when needed. One evening, my mom said, "Claire, you're always so quiet these days." I said, "I don't have much to say." She replied, "That's not like you." I didn't answer. She didn't push. I realized something then. They missed the noise I used to make, not the person I was. They missed the background music of me, not my voice. I started keeping journals again. Not to write about them. To write about me. The parts of myself I had started to forget. The colors I used to love. The songs that made me cry. The dreams I used to have before I stopped dreaming. I filled entire pages with memories only I remembered. They were small things. A yellow coat I wore when I was 7. A library card that felt like freedom. A pencil drawing of a tree I never finished. These pieces became anchors. I was building a self from scraps. At work, I became efficient, professional, distant. People described me as composed, calm, reliable. They didn't know I went home to silence and preferred it that way. I stopped answering personal questions. I gave short answers. I didn't ask them back. I wasn't being rude. I was preserving energy. Every time I spoke about my family, I felt a weight. So I stopped. I said, "We're not very close." That usually ended the conversation. I was grateful for the boundary. My apartment became my favorite place. It was quiet. Not lonely. Just still. I filled it with books and plants and soft light. No photos of people. Just landscapes, mountains, oceans, places with no names, no expectations. I lit candles without reason. I listened to the same record for days. I took long baths and longer silences. I became the curator of my own sanctuary. Sometimes I wondered if they missed me. But then I remembered they never really had me. Not the real me. Just the echo of who I thought they wanted. I started using a different last name in casual introductions. Not legally, just out loud. It felt like trying on freedom. I told my therapist it's easier to be quiet. She said, "Easier isn't always better." I said, "It's safer." That word sat heavy in the room. I knew what it meant. Speaking had become unsafe. Because speaking meant hoping someone would care. And they didn't, not in the way I needed. One day, my sister called. I didn't answer. She texted, "We haven't talked in a while. You good?" I stared at the message. I typed, "I'm alive," then deleted it. I wrote, "I'm fine," then deleted that too. I closed the app. I didn't want to explain my quiet. I didn't want to hear that I was overthinking again, or too sensitive, or making it about me. I didn't want to reopen old wounds just to prove they existed. So I chose silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted to keep what I said sacred. When you speak and people don't listen, it's not just frustrating. It's erasing. It makes you feel like a ghost in your own story. So I became the narrator of a private novel. A story told in notes and letters and internal monologues. I became fluent in unspoken truth. I started recognizing people who lived the same way. The waitress who smiled too quickly. The man on the bus who never made eye contact. The neighbor who always had headphones in. I saw them. They saw me. We didn't speak, but we understood. I began to find small ways to speak without words. I wore shirts with quotes that made people pause. I curated playlists that told stories. I left sticky notes in library books for strangers. You are not alone. You are not invisible. Your voice matters, even in silence. I didn't know if anyone found them. I hoped someone did. I hoped someone felt heard. I started writing letters I never sent. To my mom, my dad, my sister. Each one started with, "This is what I wish I could tell you." I wrote pages and pages. I burned some. I kept others. One day I might send one. One day I might not. But for now, they lived in a box labeled Unfinished Conversations. It was more than I ever had growing up. I stopped thinking of myself as quiet. I started thinking of myself as preserved, held, contained, intentional. My words were no longer discarded. They were stored, protected, waiting for someone worthy of hearing them. Or maybe just for me. That was enough. Stopping belonging wasn't an act of rebellion. It was a quiet severing. Not a slammed door, but a door that was never opened again. It started with little things, my name disappearing from invitations, my input no longer requested, my presence treated as optional. And slowly I stopped inserting myself. I stopped trying to fit a shape I was never cut to fill. I stopped expecting to be considered and instead began removing expectations altogether. When someone forgets your birthday every year, you stop reminding them. When someone forgets your voice, you stop offering it. When someone forgets you belong, you stop believing you do. I began collecting proof of my own detachment. I took mental notes of the times I was excluded, overlooked, or simply not mentioned. A cousin's wedding where I was not asked to be in the family photo. A group text about Christmas plans where I was added as an afterthought. A family dinner I was told about 2 hours before it started. These weren't mistakes. They were reminders. And I took them seriously. I started introducing myself differently. When people asked about my family, I said, "We're not close." When asked about holidays, I said, "I spend them alone." It sounded cold to some. To me, it was honest. I started seeing the difference between family and familiar. They were familiar. They knew my face. They did not know me. And I stopped trying to correct that. I deleted old photos. I removed my last name from bios, headers, email signatures. I used only Claire. It was enough. It felt truer than the name I had worn, like a label that never quite stuck. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I was done. I stopped feeling guilty for not showing up. I stopped wondering if they'd notice. I stopped expecting apology, explanation, redemption. I didn't need closure. I needed distance. And I created it, one action at a time. When my mother asked why I hadn't RSVP'd to an event, I said, I didn't think I needed to. When my sister said, "It's just not the same without you," I said, "It's been the same for years. You just didn't notice." When my father told me, "You'll regret cutting us off," I regret not doing it sooner. Those words weren't cruel. They were true. The kind of truth that echoes in your bones and doesn't need repeating. I didn't block them. I didn't erase them. I just stopped showing up for the version of myself that only existed in their memory. I stopped picking up the phone to keep a peace that cost me too much. I stopped sending cards I knew they wouldn't read. I stopped hoping for reconciliation from people who never noticed the fracture. I filled my time with new things. My work, my friends, my quiet. I adopted a cat. I named her Poet. She liked to sit on my lap when I read. She never asked questions. She never judged my silence. She belonged to me more than my family ever had. I went to therapy less. I didn't need it as much. I wasn't healing from new wounds. I was simply living without new ones being made. I reclaimed my weekends. I spent them without obligation. I let myself be full. I was misplaced. And now I was placing myself where I fit. I built rituals for myself. Sunday morning coffee with a book. Long walks with no destination. Birthday dinners with chosen friends. A yearly trip to the coast to stand in front of something bigger than me and say out loud, "I am mine," no last name. No family line. No legacy but the one I'm writing every day. When someone asks, "Where's your family from?" I say, "They're from the past." It shuts down the conversation. And that's exactly what I need. I don't belong to them anymore. I belong to myself. They didn't notice I was gone until they needed something. That's how it usually happens. People assume you're fine with how things are until you stop being available. The first message came from my mom. "We haven't heard from you in a while." Just checking in, no question. No apology. Just the shadow of concern. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. A few days later, my sister called. I watched her name light up the screen. It rang out. She left a voicemail. Her voice was chipper, rehearsed. "Hey, just wondering if you want to get coffee sometime." It's been forever. It had been forever. On purpose. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they realized they couldn't explain my absence anymore. For years, I had been the easy daughter, the one who never caused trouble, the one who helped without being asked, the one who folded quietly into the background. Now, I had disappeared from the background too, and they were left with a hole they didn't know how to talk around. Eventually, the calls turned into longer messages. "We should talk. You're still family. We love you even if we don't always say it right." That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was false. People who love you show up. They remember your birthday. They don't wait until they feel your absence to acknowledge your presence. My dad sent a message I didn't expect. "Your mother is worried. Your sister is upset. You've made your point. Can we move past this?" I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back, "I didn't make a point. I made a choice." He didn't reply. A week later, my aunt messaged me on Facebook. A paragraph about how families are complicated. How forgiveness is part of being grown. How pride keeps people apart. I didn't answer. I didn't want to argue with someone who only ever saw me at holidays. I didn't want to be guilted back into a role that had been slowly eroding my sense of self. They wanted me back because I had made it inconvenient for them to ignore me. I had become the unanswered question in every room. The sister who didn't show. The daughter who stopped returning calls. The relative who vanished and didn't leave a trail. And the silence became louder than any conversation I'd ever had with them. Then came the big one. Julia got sick. It wasn't life-threatening. Not at first. But enough for my mom to call again. This time she didn't leave a voicemail. She called twice. Then sent a text. "Julia asked if you'd come." I waited. 2 days. Then I replied, "Why?" My mom said she misses you, I asked. or she misses being seen. That conversation didn't go any further. The next week, I got a letter, handwritten, from my mom. That alone shocked me. She hadn't handwritten anything in years. Inside were 3 pages of everything she thought I wanted to hear. We weren't perfect. We should have done better. You've always been so strong. I didn't realize you needed more. It sounded almost sincere. But only almost. Because right after those lines came the twist. Your sister is struggling. We don't need drama. We need support. There it was. The real reason. The return request wasn't for me. It was for them. For image. For appearances. For balance. I didn't write back. I sat with the letter for a week. Then I tore it into strips and dropped it in the compost. I didn't need a performance apology. I needed time, space, self, respect. And I already had all 3. Julia messaged next. I don't know what happened between us, but I miss you. And I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you didn't matter. I stared at the word if, that 2-letter caveat. That conditional pass. I wrote back. You didn't make me feel anything. I just got tired of being silent so others could feel comfortable, she replied with a single heart emoji. I didn't answer. I started getting messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. You should come back around. Family means everything. Life is short. I wondered how many of those messages had been orchestrated by my mom. I could see her sitting at the kitchen table saying, maybe if she hears it from someone else. What they didn't understand was this. I hadn't left because of one incident. I left because of a lifetime of them. I left because every moment that I wasn't remembered, acknowledged, prioritized, had become a bruise. And bruises fade. But they also remind you where the impact was. They tried a different approach. We're having a family dinner. No pressure, but it would mean a lot if you came. I said, I'm not ready. They said, you can't stay mad forever. I said, I'm not mad. I'm free. That one ended the conversation. No one replied. A few weeks later, my father's birthday came around. I didn't call. I didn't text. He called me. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. I hope whatever point you're making is worth breaking your mother's heart. That one stung. Not because it was true, but because he thought guilt could still move me. I played the message for a friend. She said, they only miss you when you're not useful anymore. And she was right. I had stopped being useful and started being real. And that was what they couldn't stand. Real meant they had to reckon with their behavior, their choices, their absence. Real meant I wouldn't just show up to smooth things over. Real meant I was done being quiet to keep the peace. They wanted me back. But they didn't want me whole. They wanted the version of me that fit inside the silence. The agreeable girl. The helper. The one who said yes before even hearing the request. That version of me was gone. She had packed her things and moved into a life where she chose herself. Where birthdays were remembered. Where apologies weren't performances. Where family was built, not assumed. They kept sending invitations, updates, reminders. I archived them all. Not out of hate. Out of clarity. You don't return to a place just because you came from it. You return if it's safe. If it's earned. If it deserves you. And they never asked, what can we do to deserve you? They only asked, why are you doing this to us? And that told me everything. Julia's wedding was announced with a card so glossy it practically screamed money. Cream, colored with gold embossed lettering and a tiny pressed flower glued into the center. The envelope was addressed to Claire Morgan, a name I hadn't used in over a year. That alone told me everything. I wasn't seen. I wasn't understood. I was a placeholder on a guest list. A formality. A ghost they could still pretend belonged. I didn't RSVP, I didn't call. I didn't send a gift. I thought that would be the end of it. But the story doesn't end when you stay quiet. Sometimes it begins there. Because what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was that I wasn't done telling my story. And their perfect little ceremony? It was about to become my stage. The venue was a vineyard outside the city. I knew it from old conversations, from Instagram photos of Julia wine tasting with bridesmaids. I never followed her account, but friends shared things. There were always whispers. Even in silence, you hear things. I reached out to someone I trusted, someone who worked for the caterer. I asked one question: "Is the reception being filmed?" They said yes. I asked another: "Is there a slideshow?" Yes again. Julia had always loved slideshows. Photos of childhood, prom nights, college memories. She curated her image the way some people curated art. I smiled. I told my friend I had something to add to the presentation. Just a few photos. A short video. Sent from the family. They didn't question it. Sometimes all you need is the right tone and the right confidence. The night before the wedding, I rehearsed what I wanted to say. Not in person. Not into a microphone. Your turn to show up. I closed the video with a smile. Enjoy your big day, Julia. May you never wonder why people leave. Only remember how you made it easy. I sent the file. That morning I dressed simply. Not for the wedding. For myself. I went to a small cafe near the venue. I ordered tea. I waited. I watched the clock. The ceremony began at 3. The reception would start by 5. The slideshow was usually cued after dinner, before the first dance. Around 7. By 8, my phone began to buzz. Texts, missed calls. First from numbers on Facebook about betrayal in the family. My uncle said nothing but unfollowed me. My dad didn't reach out. My mom texted, "You need help." I wrote back, "I found it." The moment I stopped needing and wrote, "I didn't know the family well, but now I understand why your seat was empty." That one made me cry. Not out of pain. Out of relief. Because someone finally saw the truth. A truth that had been growing inside me like a quiet fire. After that night, the messages stopped. They didn't disown me. They just stopped pretending I mattered. And strangely, that was freeing. I wasn't exiled. I stepped out. On my own terms. On my own timing. The silence afterward felt earned. I no longer checked their pages. I no longer wondered how they spun it. I no longer needed their story to include mine. I had my own. I had told it. And I would tell it again if asked. Not out of bitterness. Out of boundary. Out of survival. Out of truth. Julia never contacted me again. I heard from a friend that she moved. That her husband wasn't happy about the drama. That her trust in people was damaged. I thought about writing her one last time. But I didn't. Because closure isn't something they give you. It's something you choose. I had already chosen. Her big day had come and gone. But mine had just begun. After the video played at Julie's time I'd ever truly been heard. Not in whispers. Not in private. But in a room full of faces who never really knew what I had carried all these years. The aftermath didn't hit all at once. It came in waves. The first was denial. They dismissed the video as a misunderstanding, a bad decision, a cry for help. Then came the anger. The accusations. The gaslighting texts. The character assassination. But by then, none of it mattered. Because I had already walked through fire and I wasn't looking back. I watched as they scrambled to save face. Publicly, they said I was always the emotional one. Privately, they said I was cruel. They painted me with the same brush they always used. Dramatic, bitter, unstable. But this time, their audience wasn't buying it. Because the tape didn't lie. The memories didn't lie. And most of all, I didn't lie. I let their words fall flat. I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finished. The version of me they thought they could guilt, corner, silence, she didn't exist anymore. I had buried her along with every unspoken birthday, every ignored message, every empty seat they left at the table. What they never saw coming was that my silence had not been surrender. It had been preparation. It had been fuel. It had been the long breath before the truth. And when that breath was finally released, it scorched every illusion they had built. In the months that followed, something strange happened. Peace, not in the world. Not in them. In me, I no longer flinched when the phone buzzed. I no longer scanned social media for traces of their lives. I no longer waited for an apology that would never come. I let go, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I started seeing myself not as a victim of their neglect, but as the architect of my own rescue. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their inclusion. I had already built something better without them. My own rituals, my own family of choice, my own birthdays remembered, even if only by me. I took a trip for my next birthday. Alone by design, not by rejection. I watched the sunrise from a mountaintop and whispered, "Happy birthday," and for the first time it didn't feel hollow. It felt holy, sacred, earned. The people I had chosen surrounded me in new ways. Texts that said, "Thinking of you," a friend who mailed a handwritten card, a coworker who brought a small cupcake to the office. No one forgot. And that was all I ever wanted. To be remembered. Not with parades. Not with performances. Just with presence. After the wedding, my sister stopped trying. I think some part of her knew I had reached the place she feared. Indifference. She wanted my anger, my sadness, even my guilt. Anything but detachment. But I didn't hate her. I didn't hate any of them. I just didn't need them anymore. I stopped hoping they would change. I stopped wishing for reconciliation. I stopped explaining myself. I lived fully, honestly, loudly, even in quiet. I wrote. I traveled. I fell in love with my own solitude. I began writing a book. Not about them. About women who survived being erased. Who wrote themselves back into existence. Who didn't ask for permission to speak. Who made silence into scripture. When people asked about my family, I said, they were my origin. Not my home, some understood. Some didn't. That was okay. I didn't need to be understood by everyone. I just needed to be understood by myself. And I was completely. I kept the video. Not because I needed it anymore, but because sometimes the story of your survival deserves to be seen. Not by them. By you. To remind yourself how far you've come. To remember that the worst days weren't the end. They were the beginning. The real aftermath wasn't the fallout. It was the freedom, the calm, the breath that didn't feel like holding, the laughter that didn't come with apology, the joy that wasn't borrowed, the love that wasn't conditional. I changed my name. Legally this time. Not to erase my history. To claim it. To say, that story ended and I began. People asked what prompted it. I said, truth. Because I no longer owed them anything. Not even an explanation. I walk different now. Taller, softer, unafraid. I take up space. I don't check myself in mirrors to see if I still look like someone they'll recognize. I don't look back. I don't wait for applause. I celebrate in quiet places. In quiet ways. But every celebration is loud with meaning. Because I survived them. And then I outgrew them. And they never saw that coming.